Good morning, everyone. On behalf of everyone here at the Crest Network, I'd like to welcome you to this morning's webinar. We feel like we have a really informative hour in front of us, and we are glad that you're able to join us. My name is Bill Giannone, one of the co-founders, along with Dick Wagner here at the Crest Network. And today we're going to talk about a topic that a lot of us have been interested in for quite a while. Some of us have dipped our toe in, and others just really want to know and get the information before making an informed decision. And that's what the Crest Network's all about. Today, we're going to talk about full service. Is it right for your company? The trend today in the residential water damage industry is presenting a lot of issues for us. Even before the pandemic hit, many issues that we were facing were very, very difficult and challenging for even the most seasoned restorer. One of the issues is the fact that within the residential market, there are higher premiums and deductibles facing us. Your homeowners are paying more every year for their coverage, and many, many times that premium amount and the deductible amount are being tied to the value of the property in a way that's very disadvantageous when they do have a loss. When you talk about deductibles, many times, especially over the last couple of years, since a lot of hurricanes have hit, a lot of deductibles for water damage are starting to not be a dollar amount, but rather a percentage of the policy limit or a percentage of the covered property. In a case like that, take a home in a fairly affluent neighborhood that might be worth $500,000. When they've got a 2% deductible, that would equate to a $10,000 deductible. A lot different from 10, 15, 20 years ago when many of us got into the industry where the average deductible was anywhere from $200 to $500. Maybe you saw a $1,000 deductible. Nowadays, you're not seeing that. You're seeing very large deductibles. You're seeing very, very high premiums. So the reason that the insurance companies are doing that is number one, obviously, they have to protect their own company books. But number two, they're also trying to dissuade clients from filing claims. And we all know that when clients don't file claims, they tend to want to be the type that is going to just try to get it done without hiring professionals. So those do-it-yourselfers are popping up more and more, aided and abetted, mind you, by the habits and the work processes of Home Depot, Lowe's, and some of these other, do-it-yourself home stores. They are putting publications out, YouTube videos and the like, not necessarily encouraging, but giving tips on how homeowners can handle their own water damage mitigation. They will rent them the equipment, they'll show them a short video, and leave it to the homeowner to go do it. Now, you and I both know as professionals that this is certainly not the way to handle anything but maybe the most minor sink overflow. Anything that penetrates through surfaces and gets into subfloors or into framing and gets from one floor to another has to be addressed by a professional. But unfortunately, we've got a lot of these do-it-yourselfers out there. Now, in our industry, once we actually get the call and do the work, we're faced with a lot of hassles on the back end. That back end refers to when we create our invoices and submit them. I've seen a lot more trend towards more scrutiny. When I got in the industry a little over 10 years ago, all the scrutiny in our industry was taking place up on the commercial side. It wasn't taking place down on the residential $5,000 invoice side. Yes, you were responsible for providing documentation. You needed to send some pictures, some drawing logs. But by and large, as long as you played the game straight and you didn't add on a lot of superfluous charges, chances are you were going to get your invoice paid without too much hassle. Well, there's a real trend in our industry now towards more scrutiny. A lot of these carriers are hiring third-party companies or peer review companies, as they're calling themselves, to audit our invoices, to weaken their stance as invoices for work done, and yet try to call them estimates for work yet to be done, and then provide a comparative estimate from someone who's not out there doing the work, obviously for an amount far lower than what we're invoicing. That's here to stay, guys. That's not going away just because we don't want to think about it or because we think it's unfair. There are a lot of things, like my grandpa used to tell me when I was growing up, there are a lot of things in life that are unfair. And the sooner you accept that and you try to work around it, the better off you're going to be in the long run. So for us as residential restorers, we need to understand that that's something that's not going away. We've given webinars and we have blog posts and we have entire discussions online at the Crest Network about dealing with peer review. I'm just bringing it up here because it's yet another hurdle we face in our industry today. Along with that, we're getting a lot more program work and client steering. When we're getting on the jobs, a lot of times the adjusters are being a lot more aggressive and proactive in coaching us off of the job if we're an independent restorer. Now, if you're part of that program and you're part of the client steering, then you understand the way that works and you've made that decision to do that as part of your marketing efforts, and you're willing to accept the consequences of doing that. For many of our clients at the Crest Network, it's not something that we recommend. And because of that, we know that that becomes a hurdle to aggressive growth or stabilization within our own industry. So we know that we need to work hard to ensure the credibility and the faith of our clients from the moment we get on the job site, knowing that at some point on day one or day two or even later, the adjuster might be getting in a client's ear. So we have to accept that those are trends right now. So the logical question that comes up is, if I know that making money is getting more difficult, what can I do to help my company? We should all be asking ourselves that every single day. But just knowing these hurdles, like I said, all of these hurdles existed before the coronavirus hit. They will exist after all of the coronavirus implications are gone from our lives. These problems will still exist. So we should always be asking this question, no matter what. The answer for most of us is pretty simple. We should just offer more services. If it's going to be more difficult to make X number of dollars for the work we're already doing, in order to bring in more revenue, we need to make sure we understand we will need to offer more services. Question always is, how do we offer more services? Have you ever thought about being a full service provider, but you don't know if it can work for you? Guys, we work with dozens of restorers within the Crest Network every single day. Over the years, Dick Wagner and myself have worked with hundreds and hundreds of restorers all over the country. And no matter where they're from, and no matter what their marketplace looks like, and no matter what their particular business looks like, this question comes up nearly every time during our consulting gigs. Should we be full service? What does full service mean? How can I do full service? If you look on some of the blog posts that exists on Facebook, so many of our groups within our community are trying to tackle this issue daily. There's a lot of good advice on some of those blogs. There's a lot of bad advice on some of those blogs. What we're hoping to do today is to just give you some very sound, reasonable advice. We will never make your mind up for you, but we will expose you to the pluses and minuses and all the things that are out there for you. That decision then on how to proceed is made by you. Yes, many of our clients have asked us to help them with that decision, and we're more than happy to do that. And we consider it a very personal decision. Like many things at the Crest Network, we don't believe in cookie cutter responses or answers. We don't believe in programs or processes that fit everybody. We believe that learning about you, learning your wants and desires, your tolerances, your risks, how you view yourself, what you think about your company in the next 5, 6 years, we think those go a long way towards determining the answer that is right for you. So let's understand that. As we start talking about full service, we have to know that there are actually two different ways that we can look at full service to understand within the restoration industry what the definition of being a full service provider would be. If we look at one type of full service, it would be what I would refer to as vertical full service. These would be additional emergency mitigation services that you may not currently be providing. Now, some of you are providing some of these services because they're very closely related to water damage, residential water damage to be exact. So some of you may be offering some of these, what I would call vertical services as well. But many of you may not be, choosing to just concentrate on residential water. Well, I'm here to tell you that if you start involving some of these services, that it can go a long way towards helping that bottom line and even the top line. The first service we're going to refer to is mold remediation. Yes, a lot of times when you look on websites, it says mold is tied in with water, so obviously we're going to do mold remediation. But if you're doing mold remediation, remember you want to do it in a way that helps you and your company. We have many clients that are able to do a great job marketing in their marketplace for mold services because it's a very quiet marketplace and everybody in that marketplace understands the severity of a mold infestation. In certain states, the laws that are out there that have jurisdiction over how a company does mold remediation are more strict than in other cities or towns or states. And those people know that it's a lucrative marketplace if they can get in, follow the guidelines, be properly trained, and make sure that their people are doing the work right. It can be lucrative. In other markets, it's pretty much the Wild West, and there are very few limitations on who can call themselves mold remediators, and there are very minimal requirements on how those jobs need to be performed, documented, tested, and whatnot. So your particular marketplace will determine whether or not you're going to be trying to do work in mold remediation against clients, against competition that are doing work for $500, or if everybody's doing work for $5,000. That clearly makes a big difference in your marketplace. If you're the type that has thought about doing fire and other types of mitigation outside of water damage, this might be a good time to start looking at that. Fire damage mitigation is a lot different than water damage mitigation, but we've got a lot of similarities. You know, there is water involved in most fire damages. There is the need to dehumidify the structure, especially in fires that are not as severe, if they're not full house fires. If they're very localized fires, however, a lot of water was used to put out that localized fire, then water damage may have occurred in other areas where there's minimal physical damage. Along with doing fire damage, smoke and odor cleaning is another big part that goes hand in hand. So a lot of times you'll see fire and smoke damage as one of the options that a restorer will offer. Again, in its essence, we are nothing more than cleaning companies. Because we specialize in residential water damage doesn't mean that we don't know the basics of cleaning. There are several IICRC certifications you can get for smoke and odor cleaning, and many of those certifications are not difficult to achieve because having a water damage basis gives you a really good understanding of processes and procedures when it comes to general cleaning. So these options here, mold, fire, and smoke, are pretty much the options that most restorers will go to when they start thinking about adding what I would call vertical services. A couple of options for you to think about that are not as traditional involve what I call the high-end technical vertical services, asbestos abatement being number one. Treating asbestos is, believe it or not, guys, very similar to how we treat mold. The protocols are not that much more severe than mold protocols are. The difference is the licensing and the testing and how we handle the material itself is far more intensive and far more severe than it is for mold. But for your workers, the process is eerily similar. So I'm here to tell you, if you're already doing mold, but you're hesitant about doing asbestos, research the laws in your own state. From state to state, the laws vary greatly on how to handle asbestos, and they vary greatly on what your responsibilities are for reporting, for documentation, and for record keeping. But I'm here to tell you that if your guys are really good at handling mold, I promise you they're going to be really good at handling asbestos, and the money for asbestos is a lot better than the money for mold. I'm going to give you a little inside baseball trick here. Most asbestos invoices get treated a lot different than most water damage invoices. That peer review part of our industry that I talked about before, yes, it exists in asbestos as well. However, the level of expertise of a lot of these third party peer review companies is not capable of creating a fair comparative estimate for asbestos abatement. So many times, what you create, as long as it does not look excessive and follows national and state protocols, will get paid. So this is a higher ticket than normal water, a higher ticket than normal mold, and most times gets paid without question. That alone should pique your interest. Hand in hand with abatement goes crime scene and trauma cleanup. It's a big part of our industry that has taken hold over the last few years. We're talking about things like, unfortunately, murders or deaths that occur in a home where bodily fluids are involved and there's a need for intensive kinds of cleaning of that facility. We're talking about meth labs that get busted up. And those facilities need to be cleaned very specifically, very carefully by highly trained individuals. We've all heard horror stories of what happens in buildings that are not properly treated and cleaned. So this is what we're talking about. And because we are, in essence, cleaning companies, this is a natural extension of what we could be doing. Now, yes, it is a much higher threshold for training and education, but it doesn't mean that our guys can't be trained to do this. There are many companies around the country who specialize in crime scene and trauma, but there are also many restorers around the country who are starting to understand that they can offer this as a very valuable and lucrative vertical service. Finally, I'm going to talk about a vertical service that a lot of us have dipped our toe into, that we've experimented with, and one that the Crest Network was founded on, and it's the concept of doing commercial water damage. We all understand what's going on the residential market. We spoke about that earlier. And for over a decade, Dick Wagner has been preaching that as a reason why exploring the commercial water damage market makes sense. For all of the changes that have occurred on the residential side in terms of insurances, on the commercial side, there have been far fewer seed changes within the structure. There have always been large deductibles, and there have always been riders, and there have always been exclusions, and there have always been good brokers who write programs that protect the property. For most building owners, it's less about the premium amount and more about the coverage. They understand that a loss to their property puts their company out of business or puts their tenants out of business. So they have a lot of coverage, and they just build the cost of that premium into either the rent or their cost of doing business if they happen to be an owner operator of that building. It's far different on the residential side. Residential losses occur so infrequently compared to a hotel or an assisted living center, for instance, that many times the overriding concern for a homeowner is, I want to keep my premium as low as possible because I'm really never going to have to use my insurance. That's kind of the mindset. So that's what you're up against. You're up against people who are generally underinsured or who are not very knowledgeable about what is actually in their policy. On the commercial side, there's much more attention paid to coverage details, which means when the call comes in for us, there's a really good chance that what we're dealing with is a covered loss and there's adequate resources to pay our claim. That's an important aspect, and just a reason alone why commercial water damage is an interesting option within the vertical. Let's talk about what the advantages and disadvantages are of exploring vertical full services. Advantage number one, you just increased your marketing target base. Instead of marketing just to to residential homeowners with water damage, you're now marketing to people with mold issues, You're marketing to people with asbestos issues. You're marketing to commercial clients as well. So you've greatly expanded that target market. That's very important, obviously, because when you have more people with the potential to call you, the logical conclusion is that same effort will result in more phone calls. Second advantage is you have amazingly similar skill sets applied to these types of work as you do to water damage. They're emergency service technicians that should be able to do a lot of the same work because the skill sets for cleaning is similar, if not exactly the same, from one task to another. And tying in with that, you can use your existing staff. You do not need to increase your staff. You will need to give them additional training that you have to understand. You will have to invest in them. You'll have to give them time and opportunity to learn these additional skill sets. But you can use the same skill, the same tasks, the same labor people. So if you've got 6 water damage technicians and every once in a while you find them sitting around and you were able to train them to do fire damage or to do smoke and odor removal or even to do asbestos abatement, now the chances of them sitting around goes way, way down. It's your same personnel, and now you're actually having more opportunity to get more dollars out of them. That's what I call a great use and utilization of your resources. In every way, that makes perfect sense. The most important aspect being that you don't have to go out and find new people. You're using more and more of your own staff. Very important. Obviously, for every advantage, there should be a disadvantage, and we're going to discuss them as well. First disadvantage, the vertical services I described for you are more dangerous work generally than water damage mitigation. You're putting your workers at slightly higher risk because they're dealing with more hazardous substances. When we're talking crime scene and trauma or asbestos, we're talking about potentially hazardous materials that they're dealing with. And if they're not absolutely properly trained and suited with the proper tools and equipment, you are putting them at risk. You're going to have, because of that risk, higher insurance costs for your company. You're going to incur a higher workers' comp cost if part of your revenue is derived from riskier work than water damage. You're also going to have a much higher professional liability responsibility should one of your workers or one of your clients suffer damage as a result of you doing your work. That's just a natural abstract. Now, that's partially offset by the fact that when we're talking about asbestos crime scene fire, the overall average ticket size or average invoice size for those projects is higher than an average residential water damage. Just understand you're going to need that. If you get into commercial restoration and you're dealing with a large loss, you may even need to buy a rider specifically just for that facility alone because the risk may outweigh anything that you have currently for your coverage for general liability. You may need a specific rider that covers you up to a much higher threshold because that building might be worth 20 or 30 million dollars, and God forbid one of your guys does something that sets off an electrical fire throughout the building. As the GC on that project, there would be a lot of responsibility for you guys to bear. So just understand you're going to have that. Finally, I know I discussed on the commercial water damage side that there is a better chance of having good coverage and having no problems with having your bill paid. Well, the other areas I talked about, there is a lower chance of coverage. When you talk about mold remediation, a lot of times residential policies in this day and age are written with either a mold exclusion or a mold limit. And most mold limits are written at $10,000, which includes the remediation and the putback. I'm here to tell you guys, if you're doing your mold remediation properly and it's a halfway decent size mold infestation, your mitigation invoice alone may exceed $10,000, and that leaves no money for the putback. So you have to be really careful about that. You have to make sure before you just jump in and start doing the work, you have an awareness. Have your client talk to their broker about their coverage limitations or exclusions if they have no coverage at all. That's really important for you. I'm not telling you to go and look at the policy to interpret it yourself. That is not what I'm telling you to do. We are not capable, qualified, or legally allowed to make those determinations, guys. Understand that. Let the professionals do that. What we are capable of doing is knowing that in our industry, that risk exists, and we need to make sure we address that risk. In trauma and crime scene, there may be limitations on coverage there. There may be limitations on fire if the fire was set by either arson or if the fire was set by some kind of improper wiring, then the insurance coverage might be either greatly limited or denied. So beware of all of these things. Just understand. We know the water market really well. Understand that there are equal and maybe more severe hurdles to overcome on the insurance side of some of these other areas. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't get into these areas and maybe just work strictly on a cash pay basis. There are many homeowners who will have a mold exclusion and won't have any coverage, but will still understandably want that mold eliminated. So you're able to go in and you're able to give them a cash price for your services and negotiate a contract just like you would with anyone else on the water side asking for a cash price. That exists as well, and there's not an issue doing that on any one of these types of jobs. Let's move on to the second kind of full service, and I call this one horizontal full service. Horizontal services are additional services on the projects you're already working on. So you go in and you do a water damage loss, you know that there could be several other things going on that project before the homeowner is actually back in their home. So what would those look like? Obviously, there could be things like mold and asbestos and lead that need to be addressed. So I pocket them under what are called environmental services. Rather than having to call out an asbestos abatement company or a lead removal company, if you guys were trained to do that, yes, I listed those as vertical full services, but I also list them here on the horizontal full service because we're looking at other areas on the same job we're on. So when I talked about mold or asbestos before, those were individual jobs that didn't have a water loss that you would have an opportunity. Here I'm talking about when you get on a water job where you do find asbestos. How can you capitalize on that? Because you've already got the lead, you've already got the job, you've already signed it up. How can you capitalize on it to make more money? In the next few weeks, we're actually going to be talking specifically about how you, as a Crest member, can capitalize on your water damage leads and jobs to try to make more money utilizing a lot of the principles of the environmental services. We're going to have a guest speaker in a few weeks that's going to address that for all of us. Just a little teaser for you guys. Obviously, another service that we've all dealt with is many times if we know we have to remove floors or walls, and if we're working in kitchens and we're moving cabinets, well, there's a lot of contents within the home that need to be moved, cleaned, stored, and brought back. That could be an option for you to consider as a horizontal service, something in addition to your water damage service on that project that would enable you to get a little more money. Again, what we're talking about here, guys, is more bites at the apple. We're already holding that apple. We're already taking a bite out of it by virtue of us doing the water damage. I'm now concerned on how many more bites can we get out of that apple because there's a lot more money in that particular project. Finally, the scary part for almost all of us, the reconstruction services. We're really good at taking it out. How good can we possibly be at putting it back? Many of us have tried it, failed miserably, and walked away from it. Many of us have done it, made money, but didn't want to deal with the hassles. Yes, those are realities. But there are also many of us out there who are doing it and have been doing it for years. And it's a very vital part, not only of our production process, but of our marketing process as well. Because guys, horizontal full service brings a lot of advantages and a lot of disadvantages. But one of the biggest advantages is it's a marketing tool for you. When you could go into a client and you could say to a client, you have an option. You can sign up with me and I can do everything for you until you're back in your home and I'm going to take care of it all for you. Or you can go out and hire 4 different companies and you can handle 4 different companies and their wants and needs. Many times the client is going to opt for the company, the one-stop shop. So I absolutely think that there's a valuable marketing component to it. But we're going to talk about some of those other marketing advantages. First one is it increases your gross revenue from each project. So here's what I'm telling you. Right now, if all you're doing is water damage mitigation, every time that phone rings and you close a project, hopefully you're up around the $4,000 to $5,000 average ticket. So every time the phone rings and you sign a project, you're bringing in 4,000 or 5,000. Well, if I told you now, every time that phone rings and every time you sign that project, you're going to bring in 15 to 20,000, that totally changes how excited you get about that phone ringing. What I talked about before, obviously, it greatly gives you a higher return for your marketing efforts. If you are spending X number of dollars to get leads from plumbers, those leads from plumbers go from being $5,000 leads to $20,000 leads, your return on your marketing efforts just went up hugely. And that's a very important aspect that we can't forget. You don't need to spend a lot more money on marketing using horizontal full service because you're generating the initial water damage lead, which is turning into more money. If you're thinking on the vertical side, you may have to market to different areas to get asbestos leads, to get mold leads. You might not be getting them from the same sources that you're getting your water damage from, but on horizontal full service marketing, you would be. So it is a much greater return for your marketing efforts. And finally, it diversifies your income during slow water damage periods. Remember, water damage might take 4, 5, 6 days and then you're done. If you're going to be doing the putback and the repairs on that, that putback and repair on a home, depending on the severity of the water damage, if you have gutted out a home's kitchen and living room because there was a flood that took their floors and warped their wood floors, that putback could take weeks, if not months. So if you had a quiet period of 3, 4 days of water damage, your company is still operating and doing other services. You might have packed out that home. So now you could use your technicians when it's quiet. You could use your technicians to help clean anything that came out of maybe from a fire home where you're also doing the contents cleaning from that fire. You have a crew that's out there cleaning the home. You'll have another crew cleaning the contents. So you can see how you can actually get more diversification, not only of your work product, but of your income as well. Yes, we have disadvantages. You need to have additional staff. You cannot expect your water damage technicians to be really good at hanging drywall, taping, mudding, putting up crown moldings, things like that. You're going to need a separate group of people with distinctly separate skill sets. Even in terms of the contents, you're going to need people who are experts and very knowledgeable about wrapping and moving furniture. You can't just expect our guys who might be really good at doing demo to be really good at packing china. It's just a different skill set. So you will need additional staff. That's a very, very large disadvantage because you're committing to a larger footprint for your company, higher fixed costs, higher carrying costs. Okay, you've got lower margins on a lot of these other projects. If you're doing your contents cleaning and storage properly, you should be able to make 60% gross margins. That's still below the 70 to 80% you'd be making on residential water. If you're going all the way and you're going to do the repairs, just know the very best mitigation companies doing repairs are doing only the smallest projects, the really simple ones. And if they're making 50% gross profit, they're ecstatic. Those margins are not very high relative to residential water damage. They are very high if you just looked at it in the abstract. A company doing 40 or 50% gross margins is fantastic return. But understand we've got a lot of carry costs to go along with it. So we need to always balance that. And we can't rely too much on the reconstruction portion to carry our company. Finally, you do need a higher cash reserve. Higher staff requires higher costs. Many times you will be slightly upside down, as they refer to it, on your reconstruction. If you have great, perfect processes, you can get a lot of money out of the insurance company or the mortgage company before you start doing the work on the reconstruction. Just know, however, I told you guys many times your profit margin on the reconstruction might be closer to 40%. And many times you're only going to get a half down and a half at the end. So that will require a little bit of cash to get that work done. Higher cash reserves is always going to be a strain on a business. You can't just say, well, I need X number of dollars if I'm doing just water damage mitigation. So if I'm going to double my revenue, I should need double my cash reserves. It doesn't really work that way, guys. A lot of times the money is going to be slower on these horizontal situations. So you need to be able to prepare for that. So it's a trade-off. You're going to have to trade off needing and wanting to make a higher revenue as opposed to needing and wanting more cash in your own pocket. So you have to make that commitment between higher cash revenue and higher cash reserves and needs for your business. Okay, before we go any further, I just want to make sure everybody understands my concepts here. When I'm talking about vertical full services, I'm talking about similar services within the emergency mitigation category. So if we were looking at a profit and loss statement, they would all be listed vertically. They would be listed one on top of the other if we were listing our revenues out. When I'm talking horizontal services, what I'm referring to on the horizontal services side is I'm referring to additional services for each project. So when I look at a spreadsheet, that's how my spreadsheet is laid out. On the vertical side, I'm laying out all of the different services I'm providing within one category of service, which is emergency service. Then horizontally, I'm listing the individual services for each project. So let's just, I want to talk for a couple of minutes before we conclude just about how we figure out what the fit that works for us is. How can we figure out which one works for us? Should I be vertical or should I be horizontal? Obviously, I think the answer is if you can't figure it out, give me a call. Dick Wagner, myself, Scott, any of our other experts would be more than willing to help you walk through this process. But I need for you to understand as we walk through the process, it's very important that you do a really, really strong reflection on what I call your gut. Okay. That flies a lot of times in the face of what I preach on almost all of my other webinars, which is let's get the data. I still want the data. I can provide you with the data and I can provide you with the forecasts, but I need for you to understand your gut. And what I mean by that is you have to determine a tolerance, a risk, or an aggressive stance that you are willing to accept because no change comes easily and no change comes without hurdles. One of the biggest failures of any of my clients has come from my inability to fairly and accurately assess their gut. I go in, I ask a lot of questions, and I try to be very, very calculating. I try to be very objective. But when we're talking about expanding a company, I have to take into consideration the emotional objectives of the client as well. So when I'm in talking with you, it's very important for you to share with me your gut, your feelings, your emotions about your company. Because I can give you all the examples in the world, but unless I know what you're willing to put up with, I can't make an accurate determination. If you are a process-driven person, if you're a person who doesn't like to take a lot of risk, but is looking to explore, I would absolutely urge you to explore the vertical side rather than the horizontal side. The vertical side gives you the ability to dance around expansion. It's a got it's got a lot less commitment involved for you. It's got a lot more ability to slam on the brakes at any point and say, you know what? I don't think this is working. We can pause. We can analyze. If you're the type of person who wants growth, who wants expansion, and who wants to take chances in order to do it, then I'm going to urge you to go and look at the horizontal side. The horizontal side is going to be able to give you far greater return long term if you overcome your hurdles. Now, for those of you who are not risk tolerant, the biggest hurdle is going to be overcoming yourself. And that's why I wouldn't recommend that for risk intolerant people. But for those who understand that their stomach is able to handle risk and able to handle a lot of pressures and a lot of things, then horizontal is the way to go. Finally, when talking about horizontal, I really want you to understand that things are going to not be smooth. The vertical side, you can incorporate mold, you can incorporate asbestos, you can incorporate crime scene, you can incorporate fire. A lot of those are going to go fairly smoothly as long as you've properly trained your personnel, because their processes, their overall everyday habits have already been instilled by the good processes you've employed on the water damage side. Even if you do commercial work, you've got resources available to you on an everyday basis, namely us here at the Crest Network. You get on a job that you feel like you're in over your head, you give us a call, and within an hour, you now are back where you were. You're in your comfort zone because all your processes and all of your situations are going to be handled and dealt with. So that's an easy fix for you if you're one of those people. When you get into horizontal, there is no easy fix. You're going to get into reconstruction and you're going to feel out of your element. Your processes on mitigation are not going to work on reconstruction. Your mindset is not going to work. Let me give you a really simple example. For mitigation, most of the time, it works like this. We go in, we see water damage. We're expected to go in and stop it from getting worse and then make things better. So we sign our contract. We do what we call the big 3 S's. We sign, we sketch, and we scope. Those are the first things we do. Then we develop a plan and we execute the plan. At the end of all of that, on day 5 or 6, we create an invoice for our services. We submit that invoice to the adjuster and the homeowner, and we assume that we're going to get paid for our services. Okay? I never use the word estimate anytime when we're dealing with mitigation. When you do reconstruction, that process cannot be followed. You will set yourself up for incredible failure and bankruptcy if you follow that same process. Now, what we've got to do is we've got to walk the loss, preferably with the homeowner and the adjuster. We need to identify what we're going to do. We need to now create an estimate to submit to the homeowner and the adjuster. We need to have them look at it. Most times the adjuster will create their own estimate. There will obviously be differences in the estimate. We need to come to a conclusion. We need to negotiate. We need to settle on an agreed upon scope. Then we create a contract for services with the homeowner based on that agreed upon scope. We start creating work lists. We start creating materials lists, all based on that scope. We purchase products. We get a down payment. We start work. That process is so different than running in and within 3 hours of showing up at a project, having our equipment starting to spin. Understand how different that is. If you're not willing to accept those differences and develop entirely different processes, not just for reconstruction, but for all of the other horizontal services, then it's going to be difficult for you. That's why I say, if you're not sure what fit is right for your company, call me. I think it's a very important conversation that we can have any day of the week, and we can continue to have those conversations as you're thinking through your process, just to make sure that your gut instinct follows along with the analysis and the projections so that we can make the right decision together. Guys, that's what Crest Network's all about. Understand, The Crest Network is not here to dictate to you. Dick and I have spent our lives in this industry trying to help clients with their own companies, their own thoughts, and their own processes. We like to call ourselves a fresh set of eyes. It would be really easy for us to put something together that was a $59.99 booklet that you could all purchase and tell you, follow these 50 steps and your company's going to be better. We can do that. But all that's going to do is give you $59.99 worth of value. We hope to be able to provide you every single day with more value because it's about your company, not about Crest. On behalf of Dick Wagner and all of the other experts here at the Crest Network, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that you've gotten some really good observations out of this. And please, guys, if you have any questions whatsoever on what we're talking about, on what you should do to try to expand your company's offerings, if there's something that I didn't even mention on here that you think would be a good fit for your company, please reach out to Dick or myself, give us a call. We'd be happy to entertain. Until next time, this is Bill Giannone. I want to thank you again. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.